And so AnandaFitzsimmons, who just took over the screen with Decolonizing Our Relationship with Nature and Creating Regenerative Culture, is the president and co-founder of Regeneration Canada. She's the author of Hydrate the Earth, The Forgotten Role of Water in the Climate Crisis. Ananda, we're so happy to hear from you.
I'll mute myself, it will go a lot better. Yeah, so I want to shift, as you said, it is sort of all the previous comments just sort of led right into what I want to talk about. Because it's one thing to be water literate and understand what the principles of hydrating the earth are all about, but there really is a much bigger thing that we need to shift, and that is really changing as a culture, as a global culture, changing our relationship with nature and creating a more regenerative culture. Because history has shown us that the colonial attitude in the past several hundreds of years, as humankind has spread across the planet, there's been a global culture that is extremely human-centric, and we think about exploiting nature for our own needs. And somebody mentioned earlier, just using the word resources, even the word exploiting natural resources is really common parlance. And that's just very reflective of how the entire global culture works. We deplete the land, then we move on and go and take somebody else's land. And the history of colonization has been one of reverse evolution. So the pictures on this slide are pictures of the Loess Plateau, a restoration project that was done in China and documented by John Liu with the National Geographic at the time. And the picture on the left shows a segment of that restoration project where they took barren, dead desert soil and dug trenches in the soil, and then they stuffed straw into those trenches and just waited for it to rain. And when it rained, there started to be, with the combination of straw, which is carbon, and rain, which is water, there began a process of bacterial decomposition, which just generated into biodiversity. One thing led to another, and without planting trees or doing anything else, just putting carbon and water kick-started a process of evolution of biodiversity. And then after a number of years, there was vegetation on the land, and the land came back to life. So you could say colonization, everywhere that colonization has come, we've reduced soil carbon, we've reduced rain and water cycles, and we've reduced biodiversity. So we really need to stop reversing evolution and start regenerating. And on this slide, you can see the process, the progress of people over a few hundred years taking over the surface of the earth, where you see on the left side where the entire planet used to be covered in natural ecosystems. And gradually over time, we move to where you see on the right, where there's barely any natural land. There's a very, very small percentage of natural ecosystems, and the rest is human managed ecosystems, with an extremely large percent of that being industrial agriculture. And it's possible to live in a different way. We know that indigenous people lived on the earth for millennia before we came along, and in a very sustainable way. So I think we need to look to the model of how indigenous people lived and the wisdom that indigenous people had. And there was a report that came out in 2019 that showed us that indigenous peoples are still preserving biodiversity. because even though they represent only 5% of the world's population, indigenous people steward 25% of the terrestrial land surface, which houses the greatest biodiversity and the most intact ecosystems. So that example tells us that we need to begin creating a regenerative culture by changing our thinking, by changing the way we see the world. And just as indigenous people and cultures saw themselves as being a part of nature, we need to see ourselves as part of nature and see that all creation is our relative. And when we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves, we destroy the planet. And we need to stop doing that. We need to think of ourselves as belonging to the earth. And the map in this picture is a map that was done by Grasshopper Geography, a guy that does maps of every continent on the planet. And this is the North American continent, or Turtle Island, and it's defined only by its watersheds. So every different color represents a watershed. And can we begin to start thinking of ourselves in a different way, thinking of ourselves, where we are in relation to the land, where we live in relation to our bioregion, to our watershed, and start to understand the dynamics of where we live as part of our relationship to the land. Just being more tuned into the land, knowing, when the moon is full, and following the seasons and being more in touch. And our accounting system, the global economic system, is the way that we account as a culture, as a global culture for value, is counted on GDP, which is really the only thing that counts are the transactions of goods and services, the things that we put money on. That's the only thing that's valuable. And this really needs to shift, because we know that that is not the only thing that's valuable. In our accounting systems, we account for the gray infrastructure, every building, every brick, every pipe, every wire, things that were produced and manufactured by human beings that we had to pay money to get. That has value, but it has no value without the green infrastructure, which is, the gifts that nature has given us that we have taken for granted and treated so badly. So our entire accounting system, our finance system, needs to change. And it's interesting because there are some things going on which I find really fascinating, and I think that need to be accelerated, maybe with the help of all of us. But the UK Finance Department commissioned a study by Sir Partha Dasgupta, which came out in 2019, and he really told it like it is. And here's a quote from him. He said, "So the solution starts with understanding and accepting a simple truth. Our economies are embedded within nature, not external to it. We need to change how we think, act, and measure success. Transformative change is possible, and we and our descendants deserve nothing less." So he did have the vision. We need to, create a different system to account for what is really important and really valuable. And then there was a series of other reports that came out focusing on the biodiversity crisis, but the need to increase nature-based solutions in a timely manner. So studies are being done on how we control investments in nature-based solutions by 2030, and there's a huge funding gap. So they're looking at different funding mechanisms and structures for how can we change this? How can we start to really put our money where our mouth is, put our money on what's important, and funnel money to it? Because as long as the accounting system only puts value on goods and services, we continue to incentivize the destruction of nature, and we need new mechanisms to do that. So that's going on a high level, but down here on Earth, all of us, what can we do? We have a short window of time to create a different society. And not all of us is a farmer or has a big piece of land or has $1 million to invest. So what can we do? So there's little things that you can do that add up, that are part of this idea of decolonizing the way we think, the culture that we have around us. You can increase the biodiversity in your backyard or your neighborhood, get involved in a community food forest or a community garden, do a little guerrilla planting, feed the birds. We need to change our aesthetic, like what we think of as beautiful, because in our culture, this is what man-made ecosystems tend to look like, with a reduction of biodiversity, reduction of water, reduction of carbon, and natural ecosystems look like this. So let's get used to, people still get a hard time if they don't kill the dandelions and mow their backyard. So let's change the aesthetic, let's change the culture and begin to see this as beauty. We need to support the indigenous land defenders. There are indigenous land defenders all over the world putting their lives on the line to defend their way of life and defend their land. And they're doing it, it's important for themselves, but it's important for all of us, because as we see, they really are defending the biodiversity. They really do have cultural ways of being and thinking that we could be positively influenced by. So let's get behind them. Let's support those movements, sign the petitions, donate money, go out and join them, get to know them, whatever you can do. And as Hart said, we can support local regenerative agriculture. There's a lot of farmers that are building their soil carbon, restoring water, increasing their biodiversity, and we can support them by our food buying choices. We need to get behind them. We need to shift the food system, the commodity system, the monocultures that our food is getting shipped out to other countries. Let's increase the local momentum for buying and create market demand for the things that can be created through agroecology and regenerative agriculture. We can encourage this movement to change financing, ethical impact funds. There are things that are being created, but they need a lot more stimulus. There's a great demand for them. You don't have to be a really rich person. Most of us do have retirement savings funds that are invested in something. We can talk to our financial advisors and see what the options are. This thing is changing rapidly, so keeping up to date on that and just thinking about what you can do is one more thing that everyone can do. And finally, I'm sure you can think of a lot of other things. We all have our special gifts, our special magic, and we can use those to create community projects, to create art, to do education, to raise awareness. So I really invite you all to think long and deep about that, increase your water literacy, and think about how you can pitch in, because it's going to take all of us. And so just the last thing is, in terms of increasing your water literacy, a little plug here. This is Judith's book, Water in Plain Sight, my book, Hydrate the Earth, and Hart's Water and Climate Facebook group, which anyone can join. So I'll just leave it there.
Wow, thank you, Ananda. I was going to ask you if you had any maybe like personal decolonization tips that you practice in your own life, like maybe little things that you do that help you kind of indigenate yourself to your local area, and maybe tell us where that is. And
yeah, I think really spending some time in nature and cultivating that sense of connectedness. Like I really like to celebrate the seasons, the solstice and equinox seasons. I like to be aware of the phases of the moon, go outside, get together with people, sing and dance and talk about what's going on. Talk about growing food. If you can grow food, it helps put you in touch with the cycles of the seasons and, just, being more connected, like to the land, to the weather, to the movement of the seasons, and doing that in a collective way to help more of us be more plugged in to, we are of the earth, we are part of the earth. And if we're too lost in our schedules and our computers, it's easy to forget that. So I think it's really important that whatever you do, work these days usually involves sitting down in front of a computer, but like, let's get our butts outside and remember to connect with nature.